My name is Haley Brooks, and the night I stopped being a daughter was the night my father blew out the candles on his last birthday cake. IT was supposed to be a quiet celebration, just family at least, that's what the invitation said. I spent the afternoon baking his favorite dessert, lemon cake with buttercream frosting. We used to make it together when I was little, our hands sticky with zest and sugar, laughing as we licked the spatula. It was our tradition. I thought maybe it still meant something that I even brought an old photo album. You know, the heavy kind with peeling corners and faded captions written in my mother's cursive. Pictures of my first piano recital, our summer trips to Lake Auburn, Dad holding me in his arms when I lost my first tooth. The kind of memories that used to light up his face. I just wanted to make him smile again. But from the moment I walked through that door, I knew something had changed. The house was louder than I expected. Too loud. Voices echoing off polished walls. Laughter that didn't quite reach the eyes. Then silence. A hush fell like a curtain when they saw me. The kind that makes your skin prickle. My stepmother didn't even look up. My cousins paused mid-drink, exchanged glances, and quickly turned away, whispering behind red plastic cups like teenagers at a sleepover. I tried to smile, tried to greet them, then Meredith stepped forward. She had always been the glamorous one. Perfect hair, designer heels, that kind of effortless cruelty some women wear like perfume. She looked me up and down, her gaze sliding over my sweater and flats like I was a piece of furniture. "You still dress like it's 2005, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The room erupted in laughter, and I stood there, holding a cake and a photo album, like the punchline to a joke I didn't understand and I didn't know where to go. No one offered me a seat. No one took the cake from my hands. My father was sitting at the far end of the room, surrounded by Meredith's friends, his smile distant, polite, tired. He didn't stand when he saw me, didn't wave. Just nodded, barely, like I was an old neighbor passing by. So, I placed the cake in the kitchen. Opened the photo album on the coffee table, like some desperate offering. I stood behind the couch, waiting for someone to notice. No one did. Time passed. A few toasts were made. Meredith handed him her gift, a gold watch, expensive and cold. The kind of thing that shines bright and says nothing. The kind of gift people give when they want to be remembered, not when they want to remember. And one touched the lemon cake. Not one slice did I step outside to breathe. The night air was cold, and I tried not to cry. That's when I heard it, my uncle's voice drifting from the porch. "She's just here because she thinks she'll get something when he's gone." That cut deeper than anything, that I wasn't there for the money. I didn't care about the will, or the house, or the business. I came because I still loved him. Because he was still my dad. Even if he barely looked at me. Even if I wasn't sure he still thought of me as his daughter. I leaned against the wall, hugging myself, trying to catch my breath. I wanted to leave, but I couldn't move. I wanted to scream, but the words were stuck in my throat. I just stood there, a ghost at my own father's party. When I finally slipped back inside, I was invisible again. People were dancing. Someone had moved the photo album. The cake was still untouched. My sister was on her second glass of wine, laughing at a story I couldn't hear. My stepmother sat in Dad's armchair, legs crossed, as if she'd always belonged there, and him. He never said my name that night. Not once did I stayed for another hour. Long enough to see the candles lit. Long enough to hear them sing. Long enough to watch Meredith lean over to help him blow them out. I waited for him to look my way. He didn't, and I left without saying goodbye. And on the walk to my car, I realized something that broke me more than any insult ever could. I was no longer part of my own family. I don't know how long I sat in the driver's seat that night before I finally turned the key. Maybe 10 minutes. Maybe longer. The street outside my father's house was quiet, lined with trimmed hedges and glowing porch lights. A world that looked perfect from the outside, like everything inside that house hadn't just ripped something open in me. I didn't cry, not yet. I just stared ahead, my hands still sticky with the sweat of trying too hard. The lemon cake was still back on that kitchen counter, untouched. The photo album probably shoved aside, a relic of a version of our family that no longer existed. I thought about going back for them, but what would be the point? No one wanted them. No one wanted me. That's when I heard the door creak open behind me. I slouched lower, hoping they hadn't seen me still sitting there. I didn't want pity. I didn't want apologies made out of guilt and champagne. But I heard voices, two of them. Male. One was my uncle, the other I wasn't sure. Maybe my cousin David. She's just here because she thinks she'll get something when he's gone. There it was again. The same sentence. Almost word for word. Like they had practiced it. She's never done anything for him. Meredith's the one who stayed. Meredith's the one who took care of things. They weren't even whispering. That was the part that gutted me the most. It wasn't said with caution. It was said casually, like discussing the weather or the wine, and I sat still, frozen in the dark. They didn't know about the Sunday visits I made before he got sick. About the books I mailed him from that store he liked in Vermont. About the time I paid for his prescription out of my own pocket when the insurance company refused to cover it. No one asked what I had done for him. No one cared. Meredith had proximity. She lived closer. She had time to take pictures and post them online. The curated version of care. And everyone lapped it up like gospel. But love, real love, doesn't always take the loudest shape. Sometimes it's just showing up when no one's watching. That I wanted to scream, to get out of the car and confront them, ask them how they had erased me so easily. But I didn't move. Not because I was afraid of them, but because I was afraid of what would come out of me if I opened my mouth. There's a kind of rage that doesn't come with yelling. It comes with silence. The kind that seeps in when the people you once trusted start rewriting your story while you're still alive to hear it. They talked for a minute more, then went back inside. Their laughter faded with the closing of the door. And I sat there, staring at that porch light. The same one Dad used to leave on for me when I came home late from college. That small yellow glow used to feel like a hug. Now, it just felt like a spotlight on my own disappearance. I finally drove home. And oh music, and oh words, just the engine humming, and the image of my father's face burned into my mind. How he looked past me, not at me. How he let them mock me. How he didn't say a word when I stood at the edge of that party, waiting for something that never came. That I spent that night sitting on my apartment floor with the heat turned off. The city lights leaked through the blinds, flickering like ghosts on my walls. I stared at the silence. At the phone that didn't ring. At the text that never came, and Owen asked if I got home safe, and Owen said they were glad I came. That was the moment I realized grief doesn't always wait for death. Sometimes it begins the moment people decide you no longer belonged. And I had lost him already. Maybe not physically, but emotionally, spiritually, whatever invisible bond daughters are supposed to have with their fathers. I could feel it unraveling, like an old thread pulled loose, slowly, until you're just holding a frayed end and wondering when it all started to fall apart. And still part of me hoped that maybe, just maybe, I was wrong. That he'd call. That he'd notice. That something in him would stir and remember who I used to be to him. But the days passed, and the silence remained. There's a strange kind of love that lives in the background. The kind that waits in the wings, unseen, unsaid, but still there. That's the kind I had for my father. After that night, after the birthday I wasn't really part of, I stopped calling for a while. Not out of spite, but because I didn't know if I was still welcome. Every call before had gone to voicemail anyway. Every message returned with a single word reply. Okay. Thanks. Noted. You can't build a conversation out of bricks like that. You just bruise your knuckles trying. Still, I didn't stop loving him. That I kept sending small things, like the newspaper clipping about his old college being ranked #1 in environmental science. Or a book I found at a thrift shop, one we used to read together, Jonathan Livingston Seagull. I taped a sticky note on the front. Thought this might remind you of Sundays by the window. No response. Did I convince myself he was busy, or tired, or maybe just sick of trying to bridge the gap between me and the rest of them. I knew my presence made things harder for him. Stepmother never liked me. Made that clear from day one. Meredith made it a sport to humiliate me. And the rest of the family followed her lead like sheep led by a sharper wolf. But even when his silence hurt me, I still carried him in everything I did. When I passed by the bakery near Midtown, I'd stop and buy that lemon tart he liked. I'd eat half, then wrap the rest for him, only to throw it away later when I remembered I wasn't going to see him, that I'd walk by fishing stores and pause. My dad used to take me fishing at Green Lake. He once told me, patience isn't about waiting. It's about watching the world happen without rushing it. I still think about that whenever things feel slow and empty. Like now, even at my loneliest, I never let bitterness bloom. Because the truth is, I didn't come from hate. I came from hope. Hope that something would shift. That maybe on his next birthday, he'd reach out. Maybe on Father's Day, he'd remember the card I always sent. Even when I got nothing in return, I loved him without applause. Without audience. Without reward. That's the hardest kind of love, isn't it? To care without needing to be seen. To give without being acknowledged. People always say real love is loud. But sometimes, it's a whisper in a room that never quiets down. Sometimes, it's lighting a candle no one will ever see. Sometimes, it's holding on long after everyone tells you to let go. My friends stopped asking about him. They used to say, "Why don't you just cut them off?" But they didn't understand. Cutting him off would mean killing the part of myself that still believed we had something worth saving. I wasn't clinging for inheritance. Or approval. I just wanted to know that somewhere deep down, I still mattered. That the man who taught me how to ride a bike and how to fix a leaky faucet still saw me as his little girl, not just a distant name on a holiday card. Sometimes, late at night, I'd talk to him in my head. Ask him questions. Tell him how work was going. Tell him I'd finally gotten promoted to lead designer. That I was renovating a small kitchen, and it reminded me of ours growing up, the one with the chipped tiles and mustard yellow cabinets. He used to say he'd replace them someday. He never did. But we used to cook in there like it was a palace. He wasn't perfect. He could be absent, careless with words. But I never needed perfection. I just needed presence. And the older I got, the more I realized those are two very different things. He had presence once. When I was 10 and had the flu, he stayed up all night holding a cool rag to my forehead. When I got dumped my junior year of high school, he sat next to me on the porch and told me about the girl who broke his heart in college. That man, that version of my father, I missed him every day. Even as he faded into someone I barely recognized, I kept holding on to that version. Because that's what you do when love has no audience. You love anyway. Even when the stage is empty. When the call finally came, it wasn't for Meredith. Or my stepmother. Or anyone who shared my father's last name. It was from a hospice nurse. Her voice was gentle but rehearsed, like someone who had made this kind of call 100 times. She said my father had passed in his sleep. Peacefully. Quietly. Just after sunrise, I thanked her. Hung up. Then stared at the wall for what felt like an hour. There were no words.
No tears.
Just the silence of a life that had slowly, quietly removed me from its chapters. 3 weeks had passed since that birthday. I hadn't heard a word from him in that time. Not a thank you. Not even a comment about the lemon cake. And now, there never would be. He was gone. I sat in the same spot on my couch for hours that day, arms wrapped around my knees. My phone buzzed with messages, but none of them were about him. Not for my family anyway. Work updates. A dentist appointment reminder. A friend asking if I wanted to meet for coffee. No one said, "I'm sorry." No one said, "Did you hear?" Because no one thought to tell me I wasn't in their circle anymore, and that became even clearer when I saw the obituary. It was published the next morning in the local paper. A photo of my father, older, distant, not the man I remembered. The write-up named Meredith as his beloved daughter, and his wife as his constant companion. I wasn't mentioned. Not once. Not even as a relative. Not even in passing. They had erased me. He had died, and I had become a ghost in my own bloodline. Still, I showed up to the funeral. I wore black. Tied my hair back the way he used to like it. Brought a single lemon blossom and tucked it beneath the folds of the coffin's bouquet when no one was looking. Meredith gave the eulogy. She talked about his business sense, his philanthropy, his wisdom. She called him Dad like it was a crown. There was no mention of our family vacations. No stories of the jokes he used to tell. No mention of how he used to do magic tricks to make me laugh when I was sick. Just numbers and accolades and curated grief. When it was over, people milled around the reception hall. Eating, chatting, reminiscing like it was a cocktail hour. No one came up to me. I was standing by the coffee urn like I wasn't even there. A few people glanced at me, confused. One woman even asked, "And how did you know Thomas?" I swallowed. "I'm his daughter," I said. The woman blinked, clearly embarrassed. Oh, I didn't realize. Of course she didn't. No one told her. No one remembered I stayed for 20 more minutes, then slipped out the side door before they started the slideshow. I didn't need to see what photos they chose. I already knew none of them would be mine back at home. I pulled out the photo album, the one I'd brought to his birthday. I flipped through the pages, his arms around me at my 5th birthday, him teaching me how to ride a bike, us baking that lemon cake. Proof. Proof that once I had been loved. That once I had belonged. But grief has a way of rewriting everything, doesn't it? It takes the warmth and replaces it with questions. It takes the laughter and leaves only silence. It takes the man you called Dad and turns him into a stranger who forgot your name at the end. And yet, despite it all, I didn't hate him because I knew something they never would. I knew how to love without being seen, how to forgive without being asked, how to show up even when the doors were already closing. That was my silent goodbye, not a speech, not a sobbing collapse, just a presence, a final act of love. Even if no one noticed, I didn't plan to visit the house again. Not after the funeral. Not after the way they looked through me, around me, never at me. But I needed to drop off a few legal documents related to Dad's old accounts, and no one had given me an address to send them to except his. It felt strange pulling into the driveway. Familiar, but hollow. Like returning to a childhood home that had been stripped of all its memories and rented out to strangers. The rose bush by the mailbox had been trimmed back harshly. Dad used to let it grow wild. He said beauty wasn't meant to be tamed. But now it looked like everything else in his life. Manicured, colorless, polished to please someone else. I stood at the door for a long moment, documents in hand, trying to steady my breathing. I knocked, and oh answer. Just as I turned to leave, the door swung open. Meredith. She was barefoot, in silk pajama pants and a matching top, the kind of outfit that whispers wealth. Her hair was loose. Her eyes, tired but sharp. "Oh," she said flatly, leaning against the doorframe. "Didn't expect to see you." "I just came to drop these off," I said, lifting the envelope. She took it without looking. "You could have mailed it." "I wasn't given another address," I replied. She smiled. Thin. Dismissive. "Well, now you have it. You don't need to come here again." She started to close the door, but I saw past her shoulder. The living room was unrecognizable. The floral curtains Dad picked out were gone, replaced with thick beige drapes. The armchair he loved, his worn leather reading throne, was nowhere to be seen. The walls were bare. No photos.
No paintings.
No trace of the man who used to live here. "Where's his chair?" I asked without thinking. Meredith blinked. It didn't match the aesthetic. My throat tightened. "So, you just threw it away?" She shrugged. "Donated it."
I'm redecorating.
"Making it mine. You know how it is." But I couldn't imagine walking into someone's life the moment they left it and claiming it like an inheritance. Like a prize. Then I saw it. A box of paint cans near the stairs. Swatches taped to the wall. And just past the hallway through the cracked bedroom door I saw it, the master bedroom, new bedding. A jewelry box. A mirror I didn't recognize. She had moved in already. "He's only been gone a week," I whispered. She didn't flinch. "Life moves on, Haley. You should try it sometime." I stepped back. The ache in my chest swelled so suddenly, I had to grip the railing. This wasn't just grief anymore. It was theft. A slow, arrogant kind of theft. Not of objects, but of presence, memory, meaning. She wasn't mourning. She was taking, and she had taken everything, but I didn't say a word. I left, and in the days that followed, I started hearing stories from neighbors, from old family friends, from people who remembered me even when the rest tried to forget. They told me how Meredith had already met with Dad's financial advisor, how she had held private meetings about the estate, how she was getting things in order. But no one had said anything to me. I wasn't consulted, I wasn't invited, I wasn't acknowledged. And their minds she had already taken the throne. The queen of a kingdom she didn't build. Crowned not with love or loyalty, but proximity. And timing that I wondered if Dad had given her permission. If he had told her, "This will all be yours." If he had looked her in the eyes and said, "I trust you with everything." Or if she simply assumed, after all, I had been invisible for so long. Maybe she thought I wouldn't fight. Maybe she thought I didn't matter. Maybe everyone did. But what they didn't know, what not a single person saw coming, was that something had been left behind, a will, not just a piece of paper, but a reckoning, and it was waiting, as I. The invitation came in the form of a cold email subject. Thomas Brooks, execution of last will and testament. It was from the law firm my father had used for decades. There was no warmth in the wording, no personal greeting. Just a time, a place, and a reminder to bring identification. Formal. Efficient. Like I was a business associate, not his daughter. Still, I marked the date. IT was raining that morning. A soft, steady drizzle that blurred the windows and soaked the hem of my coat before I even reached the door. I sat in the parking lot of the law office for a while, watching the other cars pull in. Meredith arrived in a sleek black SUV, wearing dark glasses and a beige trench coat, like some elegant widow from a soap opera. My stepmother was beside her, lips pressed tight, chin lifted. I stayed in the car until they went inside. Then I followed. The receptionist directed us to a small, wood-paneled conference room. I was the last to enter. Meredith was already seated at the head of the table. She looked at me once, just once, and then turned her head as if the air beside her had moved. There were a few others. My uncle, a family friend who had been Dad's accountant, the lawyer, Mr. Hollowell, sat across from us with a thick file in front of him. He looked older than I remembered, tired, like a man who had seen too many families crumble in rooms just like this. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "As executor of Mr. Brooks' estate, I will be reading aloud his final will and testament, dated March 17th of this year." March 17th. My stomach flipped. That was only a few months ago. After everything. After the birthday, I folded my hands in my lap, knuckles white. He started reading AT first. It was all standard. Funeral costs, outstanding debts, the dissolution of small accounts. My father had always been meticulous with finances. There were no surprises in that part. Then came the personal bequests. To my wife, for her years of companionship, I leave her the personal jewelry gifted during our marriage and a monthly disbursement from my trust for a period of 3 years. My stepmother blinked. Just once. Meredith looked at her sharply but said nothing. To my niece Amanda, I leave the painting of our family cabin, per her request. The lawyer continued. To my daughter Meredith, she straightened, I leave my collection of rare coins, the leather-bound encyclopedias from my study, and the wine cellar contents. That was it, she frowned. "Excuse me," she said, interrupting Dr. Hollowell didn't pause. He simply turned the page, then he read it. To my daughter Haley, who never stopped believing in me, even when I failed her. The air shifted. Meredith's mouth parted, the beginnings of protest catching in her throat. I leave full ownership of my home, all business-related savings accounts, and the controlling interest in my design firm. She alone has the authority to decide the future of my estate. The room went still. The only sound was the ticking of the wall clock, counting out the silence like a slow drumbeat. I didn't react. I didn't blink. I just stared at the table. Dr. Hollowell closed the folder gently, letting the finality of his words settle like dust. Meredith finally found her voice. That can't be right. He wouldn't do that." "He did," the lawyer replied calmly. "There must be a mistake. He didn't even speak to her. She hasn't been around. She's not part of this family." I met her eyes then. The fury in them. The disbelief. But also the fear, because in that moment, she understood. She hadn't won. Despite all her positioning, all her manipulation, all the months of control. Dad saw through it. He had been watching, he knew, and in the end, he chose me. Not out of pity, not out of guilt, but out of recognition that I didn't smile. I didn't speak. I didn't gloat, because this wasn't about revenge. IT was about being seen, finally. To my daughter Haley, who never stopped believing in me, even when I failed her, those words still echo in my head. Not because they were dramatic, not because they shocked the room, but because they were the first thing he'd said to me, truly to me, in years. Even if it was from beyond the grave that I end that moment, the air in the conference room seemed to change. No one spoke. My stepmother leaned back in her chair like someone trying not to tip over. Meredith just stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, breath shallow. The lawyer turned the page slowly, as if he already knew what storm would follow. I kept my hands still in my lap. But inside, I was shaking because those words weren't about money. They were about remembrance, about truth, about a father reaching through time and silence to say, I saw you. I didn't forget you. I know what they tried to do to you, and I never stopped loving you for it. He continued, in that formal legal voice. Haley alone is granted full authority to determine the future of my estate. She is entrusted with all assets tied to my design firm, including current projects, client lists, and proprietary licenses. She is also granted full ownership of the family home and all contents within it. There it was, the house, the business, everything they thought belonged to them. Meredith looked like she'd been punched in the stomach. I could see her doing the math in her head. The house she had redecorated. The firm she had already begun taking meetings for. The life she assumed was hers by default. All of it had just been rerouted in a few sentences to me. She stood suddenly.
No, she snapped.
This is a mistake. He must have written this when he wasn't well. When he was confused. Mr. Hollowell, unfazed, adjusted his glasses. The will was drafted and notarized in full mental capacity. Witnessed by 2 attorneys. Your father made these decisions very clearly. There were no signs of duress, confusion, or undue influence. I was the one who took care of him, she hissed. I was the one who stayed. And that was true. She did stay. She stayed to make herself seen. She stayed to be chosen. But love doesn't always live in the room. Sometimes it lives in the ones who leave quietly. Who love without reward. Who don't fight for spotlight but for meaning. That was the difference. That I didn't stay to be remembered. I stayed because I couldn't let go. That I stood then, too, not to argue, not to defend myself, but because my legs had started to ache from holding so much silence. Everyone looked at me, even Meredith. And in that moment, I felt everything I'd carried. The loneliness, the humiliation, the forgotten birthdays, the empty holidays, the photo album left untouched, the lemon cake left to dry on the counter. All of it came to the surface, but I didn't cry. I simply said, I didn't come here for any of this. I came because I loved him, even when he made it hard to. And then I sat down. The lawyer gave a small nod. Meredith turned away, face tight with fury. My stepmother had gone pale, like someone who had just watched their reflection shatter in a mirror. There were more legal details, more technicalities, but I barely heard them. All I could hear was that one sentence. To my daughter Haley, it was the sentence I'd been waiting for since the night they laughed at me in that living room. Since the day I heard them say, I only came for what I could get. They were wronged. I didn't come for what I could take. I came because I never stopped being his daughter. Even when they tried to erase me. Even when he drifted away. Even when the silence was louder than love. And now, for the first time, I wasn't invisible. I was named. I was seen. When it was over, the others filed out quietly. And Owen said goodbye. And Owen looked at me. I sat alone in that empty conference room long after the door closed, listening to the sound of the rain tapping against the windows. My hands trembled, not from victory, not from relief, but from the weight of being chosen after so many years of being ignored. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt cracked open, because this wasn't justice in the way people think of it. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't erase the years of being forgotten, or the birthdays spent alone, or the way they all laughed at me like I was some lost stranger who had wandered into the wrong family. But it was something that was my father, in the only way he knew how, reaching back through silence to make it right. And even if it came too late for hugs or apologies, it came with truth, and truth is enough. I left the office with the will still in my hands. It felt heavier than paper should. I didn't go straight home. I drove for hours, past places that once meant something. The school where he picked me up on rainy days. the park where we used to feed the ducks, the little diner off Route 9 where he taught me how to count change from the tip jar. They were all still there, but they felt different now. Like someone had drawn a curtain between the past and the present, and I was standing right in the middle, half in shadow, half in light. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and opened the photo album again. Page after page of us, smiling. Messy, beautiful, unfiltered memories. Before Meredith.
Before the remarriage.
Before everything fell apart. And suddenly, I saw it so clearly. They never really saw me because they never wanted to. They saw me as a problem to manage. A leftover from another life. An inconvenient reminder that Dad once had a love before the polished, perfect family Meredith and my stepmother curated. They didn't laugh at my clothes because of the style. They laughed because I didn't match their script. Because I wasn't part of the narrative they'd worked so hard to control. But my father saw it. Even in his distance. Even in his silence. He had been watching, and when it came time to speak, to truly speak, he didn't leave it to chance. He wrote my name down, not out of guilt, not because I asked, but because deep down he knew I was the one who never turned away. He knew I never asked for anything, not because I didn't need love, but because I loved him enough not to demand it. He knew that behind every gift I sent, every text I left unanswered, every call that went to voicemail, I was still his, not perfect, not loud, just present. And that scared them more than anything, because love without agenda is dangerous to those who thrive on control. That I didn't scream when they erased me, that I didn't fight when they mocked me. I just kept showing up, quietly, and he saw that that's what they never understood. Loyalty doesn't always perform. It doesn't need witnesses. It just stays. Through birthdays. Through silence. Through the kind of grief you don't talk about. I didn't need the house, I didn't need the firm, but I needed to be seen. And now I had been, not by them, but by him, and that was enough. The days after the will reading felt like living in two realities at once. In one, I was the same invisible daughter they had dismissed at every family event, the girl holding lemon cake no one ate. In the other, I now held the keys, literal and metaphorical, to everything they thought belonged to them. The calls started that evening. First it was Meredith. She didn't even try to pretend. "You know this is a mistake," she snapped the moment I answered. "You don't even want any of this." She was right about one thing. I didn't want the house. I didn't want the furniture. I didn't want to walk through a front door that once shut me out. What I wanted was what no one could give me anymore. My father, alive and whole again, before he drifted into silence. Before he became someone I had to earn love from. But I didn't say that. I said, it wasn't a mistake. Click. Next came the text from my stepmother that we should meet. Talk about how to handle the transition gracefully. If this were a business deal. As if I had stepped into her world uninvited and now owed her something for the inconvenience. But the truth is, grace is what I had given them for years, and it had been mistaken for weakness. The lawyer confirmed what was already clear. Dad had left things in my name for a reason. There was no ambiguity, no loophole, no hidden codicil. He had known exactly what he was doing. And even if his voice had grown quiet in the end, he had made sure his final decision would be loud enough to cut through everything they'd try to silence. I returned to the house a week later. This time, with keys in hand, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like stepping into someone else's costume, one that didn't quite fit. The furniture looked smaller. The light hit differently. My father's scent, cologne and old cedarwood, was already gone, replaced by lavender sprays and whatever perfume Meredith had favored. The living room still bore the scars of her taste. Minimalist decor, clean lines, not a single photo. A house scrubbed of history, but in the hall closet, behind winter coats and broken umbrellas, I found something, a box, unlabeled. Inside were letters, receipts, handwritten notes in my dad's handwriting. There were post-its with grocery lists, sketches of a redesign for the garage he never got to finish, and one envelope addressed to me, unsealed. Inside was a card, just a simple card. "Haley, I don't always know how to say things, but I'm sorry for the distance. You didn't deserve it. You are still the best part of my life. I hope you know that. Love, Dad." That was the moment I let myself cry. Not the kind of cry that wrecks you, but the quiet kind. The kind that softens the ache. The kind that says, You can breathe now. IT didn't make up for everything, but it made the silence make sense. He hadn't forgotten me. He had just gotten lost. And now, finally, I had something to hold on to, something no one could take away. The house is mine now, but it doesn't feel like possession. It feels like a question. One I've been trying to answer every day since the will was read. I walk through each room not as a victor, but as a daughter piecing together the fragments of a man I loved. Even when he left me behind, I've kept some of Meredith's changes, the new curtains, the updated light fixtures. But I brought back the old photos, the ones she took down. I framed the picture of me and Dad at Lake Auburn, my pigtails soaked from the canoe trip, his arm wrapped tight around me. I hung it in the hallway, centered, unmissable. Some days I still expect a call. Maybe from Meredith, maybe from my stepmother, with some final dig or request. But the phone stays quiet. And for once, I'm okay with the silence, because this time, it's not the kind that isolates, it's the kind that frees. Did I visit Dad's grave often? Not with flowers, but with lemon cake. I sit cross-legged on the grass, tell him about the projects I'm managing at the firm, about the tenants I've let stay on at reduced rent. I tell him I forgave him, not because he asked, but because he saw me when it mattered most. In the end, he gave me the one thing I'd been denied my entire adult life, the place to name, and the knowledge that love, even when buried beneath silence and shadow, can still find a way to speak. I don't need their approval. I don't need their apology. I was never invisible. I just needed someone to look. And now they finally can't look away.